No one had to kill him. He died quietly. Not with a war cry, not with a bullet, not even with a broken heart. He died on a couch. He died in front of a glowing screen. He died with dopamine still dripping in his veins and a vague sense of something missing that he couldn't name. That's how most men die now. Not in battle, not in purpose, but in pleasure. And Dostoevsky saw it coming. Long before Wi-Fi, long before high-speed anything, Dostoevsky looked into the heart of man and saw something terrifying. That given the chance to escape reality through comfort, he will. Not because he's evil, but because he's tired. Because pain is hard, responsibility is hard, facing yourself is hard. So when the world offered men a substitute, something that felt like power, like intimacy, like progress, most didn't question it. They grabbed it with both hands, and somewhere in that transaction, they traded their soul for stimulation. Dostoevsky didn't call it porn. He didn't call it video games. He didn't have to. He called it the most basic need of man, the need to bow, to surrender to something greater. And when nothing greater is offered, he bows to whatever will let him feel something, even if that something is hollow, even if it leaves him more numb than before. In Notes from Underground, he warned us about the man who becomes a caricature of himself, cynical, intelligent, paralyzed, the man who knows the truth but has no will to act on it. Sound familiar? That's the modern man. The one who scrolls endlessly, who builds empires in virtual worlds while his real life gathers dust, who watches bodies on screens because he doesn't know how to touch with presence, who numbs his existential ache not with poetry or prayer, but with 5 tabs open and 1 eye on the clock. And all of it looks normal. All of it is even celebrated. You work hard. You deserve to relax. You're just having fun. No one tells him what's really happening, that with each click, each binge, each retreat into comfort, his hunger for real life gets weaker. And then he wonders why nothing excites him anymore, why conversations feel flat, why sex feels mechanical, why ambition feels like a joke. It's not because life is meaningless. It's because he has starved his soul on artificial meaning for so long that the real thing now tastes bland. Dostoevsky wrote that man could get used to anything, even the deepest suffering, if it came with the illusion of choice. And that's the trap of modern comfort. It pretends to give you freedom when all it really gives you is options, none of which lead to aliveness.
Porn is not just about lust, it's about control. It's a digital world where no one says no, where desire is instantly rewarded, where vulnerability is never required. Games are not just about play, they're about power. They offer clear rules, visible progress, and instant feedback, everything life doesn't give. Comfort is not just about rest, it's about escape. A way to avoid the terrifying responsibility of becoming someone real, someone accountable, someone alive. And the worst part? The man knows. Deep down, he knows this is killing something inside him. That every hour spent chasing comfort is an hour stolen from his potential. But he keeps going. Not because he's weak, because the system is designed for him to go numb. Because modern life doesn't ask him to rise, it asks him to comply. To stay soft, to stay entertained, to stay distracted. And so he dies, slowly, elegantly, addicted to things that require nothing from him, obsessed with digital highs that demand no risk, no courage, no blood. Dostoevsky would call this the grand surrender, not to God, not to truth, but to the lie that life can be lived without suffering, that man can be fulfilled without depth, that meaning can be mass-produced and fed to him in pixels. But it can't, and he knows it. He feels it every time he wakes up more tired than he went to sleep, every time he finishes a night of endless pleasure and feels emptier than he started, every time he looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize the man staring back. The tragedy isn't that he's lost. The tragedy is that he's told himself this is what freedom feels like, that detachment is strength, that loneliness is peace, that nihilism is wisdom. But it's not. It's just the result of avoiding life for too long. Dostoevsky believed that without struggle, man becomes monstrous. Not violently, but spiritually. A hollowed-out version of what he was meant to be. A creature of habit, not conviction. A spectator, not a participant. A shadow with fingers, chasing pleasure because it's the only thing that reminds him he's still alive. And so, the death of men doesn't happen in loud moments. It happens in quiet, forgettable ones. The 3 a.m. scroll, the 10th browser tab, the game that turns into a lifestyle, the comfort that becomes a cage, the lie he tells himself that tomorrow he'll change, but he won't. Not unless something breaks. Not unless he looks the numbness in the face and says, "This is not who I am."
The terrifying thing about comfort is not that it soothes, but that it sedates. It doesn't attack the soul, it slowly silences it. It doesn't need to fight a man's strength, it only needs to lull him into never using it. Dostoevsky warned that a man who is given everything he wants will, in time, destroy it all out of boredom. Because man wasn't built for endless ease. He was built for fire, for struggle, for the ache of becoming. And yet the modern man lives in a world designed to keep him comfortable but unfulfilled, dizzy but detached, informed but directionless. He lives with a myth in his bones, that happiness is the absence of difficulty, that the goal of life is to be unbothered, uninterrupted, untouched by anything that might require soul. But Dostoevsky knew better. He knew that suffering was not the enemy of manhood, comfort was. In The Brothers Karamazov, he tells the story of a world where Christ returns only to be arrested by the church for disturbing the peace. Why? Because freedom terrifies people more than chains. Because suffering for truth is too expensive, too raw. They'd rather be led by lies wrapped in luxury than face what it costs to live in truth. And today, men are not being arrested, but they are being sedated. Not by force, but by consent. They agree to their own decline because it comes with shiny packaging. They stop resisting because the numbness feels easier than the responsibility. They aren't broken by trauma. They're slowly hollowed out by mediocrity. And then they call it maturity. They say things like, "I've grown out of ambition," or "I'm just focusing on peace." But peace without depth is just quiet despair. It's what happens when a man trades his edge for acceptance, his hunger for habit, his calling for content. And content is what he's been fed. Not truth, not vision, content. Click after click. A simulation of thought, a parody of connection, something to pass the time while his soul waits for him to wake up. But men weren't built to consume. They were built to carry. Not to entertain themselves into numbness, but to bear the weight of something sacred. And that weight is missing now. That sense of burden, of mission, of presence. And so he turns to pixels. Not because they're inherently evil, but because they're easy, predictable, obedient.
Porn doesn't ask him to be strong. It doesn't require character. It never rejects, never corrects, never sees past the surface. It lets him stay a boy in a man's body. A boy who gets to feel powerful without ever being powerful. And games, they give him the architecture of purpose, missions, quests, achievements. But all of it disappears the second the screen goes dark, because it isn't real. It never demands his life, only his time. And that's the real currency being drained, his time, his attention, his capacity to go deep. Even relationships now are often approached like content. Swiped, rated, ghosted, consumed. Not because men don't want love, but because many don't know how to receive it anymore. Because love is uncomfortable. It reflects, it disrupts, it requires surrender, patience, grace. And a man who has been numbing for years doesn't know how to give that. He knows how to perform, he knows how to chase, but not how to stand, not how to sit still in the presence of another soul without needing to escape. And so he drifts, half alive, often successful in appearance but bankrupt in spirit. He might be wealthy, he might be praised, but if you strip away the metrics, the money, the followers, what's left? Can he sit with himself without distraction? Can he hear his own soul without cringing? Can he answer, honestly, who he's becoming? Dostoevsky would say this is the great test of the modern man, not whether he avoids destruction, but whether he chooses rebirth. Whether he is willing to feel again, to want again, to ache again. Not for instant gratification, but for meaning that takes work. And that work is not glamorous. It's not viral. It's quiet. Inward. It's putting the phone down, closing the laptop, sitting in silence long enough for the discomfort to rise, and then not running. Because that's the death most men are truly avoiding. Not physical death, but the death of the false self, the part of them built entirely out of noise, distraction, escapism, the digital avatar of masculinity that never has to cry, never has to confess, never has to change. But real manhood doesn't come from being unshaken. It comes from being shaken and staying grounded. It comes from facing the abyss without needing a buffer, from living without sedation, from choosing presence over pleasure, even when pleasure is easier. And if he's lucky, if he's willing to go that deep, the man starts to hear a voice, a small, unfamiliar one. The voice that was buried under years of clicking and scrolling and posturing. The voice that says you were made for more. Not more success, not more sex, more soul. And that's when something ancient begins to stir. Not a new personality, not a better version of the avatar, but the resurrection of something real, something dangerous, something alive.
The real resurrection of a man doesn't happen in public. It doesn't come with applause. It happens in the trenches of his own attention, when he finally sees that what's killing him isn't failure, it's disconnection. Disconnection from pain, from purpose, from the raw, sacred ache of being fully alive. Dostoevsky's prophecy wasn't that men would become monsters, it was that they would become empty, that they would trade the suffering of the soul for the sedation of the flesh and call it liberation. But man was never meant to be safe. He was meant to be sacred. Sacred things are always costly. They require sacrifice, presence, blood. The world today offers men a path of no resistance, no risk, no pain. But that's not a path, that's a grave. Because every real transformation demands discomfort. Every real becoming begins with rupture. And most men today are trying to build a kingdom with no pain. They want the crown, but not the cross. They want the meaning, but not the price. And here's the catch. Comfort is never satisfied. It always wants more. More screen time, more control, more fantasy. But the soul doesn't thrive on more. It thrives on meaning, on mystery, on things that can't be swiped or screened or skipped. And Dostoevsky, for all his darkness, believed that meaning wasn't found in escape. It was found in embrace of suffering, of contradiction, of the beautiful tragedy of being human.
The man who wakes up from this coma doesn't do so all at once. It happens in stages. First, he sees the lie, that he was never truly free, that his pleasure was purchased at the cost of his passion, that his escape routes were really prisons. Then he starts to say no, not to women, not to society, but to the system within himself that kept him small, the part of him that ran every time life asked him to bleed a little. And with each no to comfort, he says yes to something deeper. He starts to rebuild, not a personality, a presence, a way of walking through the world that doesn't need noise to feel valuable. He learns how to be with others without performing, how to feel without apologizing, how to want without needing. It's awkward at first, clumsy, because addiction to comfort is an unlearning process. Every impulse to numb must be noticed. Every craving for the screen, the body, the easy answer must be met with stillness, with breath, with the terrifying freedom of being fully here. But something grows in that place, slowly, quietly, a kind of gravity. The kind of gravity that other people feel without needing to be told. Because real men don't broadcast their transformation, they embody it. They walk differently. They speak with fewer words but more weight. They love without begging. They lead without needing to be followed. Because they're no longer reacting to life. They're responding to it from the center, from depth, from soul. And the irony is, once the man no longer needs porn, games, or comfort, he finally becomes someone who can enjoy life, not as an escape, but as an offering. He doesn't reject pleasure, he reclaims it. He understands that real joy isn't a shortcut, it's the fruit of inner order. And inner order is born from facing chaos, not avoiding it. He reclaims his mind, his body, his attention, not because he's trying to be better than others, but because he's done being less than himself.
This is what Dostoevsky meant when he said, "Man is a mystery. It must be unraveled. And if you spend your whole life unraveling it, don't say you've wasted time." The death of men is not final, but it is real. And the resurrection is not theoretical. It's lived in the daily choices, in the refusal to disappear, in the quiet courage to live awake in a world that begs you to go back to sleep. If you're feeling the pull, don't ignore it. That discomfort you feel, it's not weakness. It's invitation. An invitation to return, not to the man you were taught to be, not to the man culture rewards, but to the one you were born to become. The one who doesn't need escape because he's not afraid to feel. The one who doesn't need fantasy because his reality is meaningful. The one who doesn't need comfort because he's found something deeper than comfort: conviction. So here's the truth, stripped bare. If porn is your priest, games are your gospel, and comfort is your God, you will never know peace. You will know pleasure. You will know distraction. You will know the echo of something beautiful, but not beauty itself. Because beauty costs. Depth costs. Manhood costs. And the only question left is, are you willing to pay? If this hit you in a place you didn't expect, don't rush to fix it. Sit in it. Let it burn. Let it rearrange something. And when you're ready, start with this. Put the phone down. Turn the volume off. Walk into the silence like it's a battlefield, because it is. And your soul is waiting on the other side of it. Not just to survive, but to come alive.